Hello, everyone. I'm Liz Kopko with Beyond Type 1, Beyond Type 2, and today we have a really great guest, Nalini. I'm so excited for you all to hear her story and understand what her life is like living with diabetes. So, Nalini, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited about this.
To start us off, can you share your diagnosis story and, how long you've been living with diabetes?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in 2016. And I have a strong family history of diabetes. When I started experiencing symptoms, I think I kind of knew what it was, like subconsciously. So I got extremely tired, like during the workday, I would get so sleepy that I would have to like go into the bathroom and take like a quick nap to like come back and sit at my desk and do work. Otherwise, I would fall asleep. Or like I would come home from work and I would just be so exhausted that I needed to take a nap before I could um, make dinner. Of course, frequent running to the restroom and I think those were the two big symptoms that I had. I think occasionally I would get some like excessive thirst, but that wasn't consistent. I actually had been diagnosed with high blood pressure. I think probably like a few months before my official diabetes diagnosis. And that just sort of, I don't know, I think it came about from like a routine like doctor's visit, which then turned into, oh my God, your blood pressure is so high, you got to go to the ER, right? So I had already gotten that diagnosis and I was just kind of like wrapping my head around this. And then I went to my follow-up appointment for that when they did sort of like, the whole like blood test, like, just they do the routine blood test, right? And then so the official diagnosis came through like this online portal. It was just like, your sugar levels are at like 250 or whatever. And this officially puts you in the diabetes category. It was like the most impersonal way to like get this. Like, I
Wow.
don't know. I think for me, it was such a devastating diagnosis.
To get over email? Yeah.
Yeah, with like no other like context or support or anything, right? Like, I mean, obviously, like there was a follow-up that I went to after that, but still to get the diagnosis, given sort of like, and I know you guys are like doing a really wonderful job right now talking about like stigma around diabetes, right? And then, so I have type 2 diabetes, and then to get like, to get a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, you sort of like going through in
Yeah.
your mind, like, what are all the things that I've done wrong? And I think the thing that really like my mind latched onto was weight. It felt like it should have been something that I was able to control, and I didn't control it, and that's how I kind of, ended up here. And eventually when I did get like, go see the doctor, it's
Mhm.
not like, a whole range of supports that you get when you get your initial diagnosis. They were like,
Yeah.
don't eat carbs, don't eat sugar, and like lose weight. Just like, I mean, and the assumption was that I wasn't super active, right? Even though I'm a big hiker, and this diagnosis came on the heels of me like hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. And they didn't like know that about me, right? So it was just sort of like based on just like numbers and visually what they see. So that was kind of, my diagnosis and how I kind of navigated through that.
Well, I'm sorry that that was your diagnosis because that's hard to get something that heavy, like that emotional over a very impersonal form of communication. Like not even a phone call. Come on.
Right. Right. And I think in some ways, like there's an assumption, like, this is so routine. Like
Yeah, you're
People
just
aren't
another
going to
person
have
diagnosing.
right. And like, and I think there's like in the medical community, I think, there is not enough awareness about how much of managing diabetes is really like emotional too, right? It's not just the physical part of it, how much of it is emotional. And then just kind of like, what general practitioners tell you once you get the diagnosis is very sort of, very basic, right? And for a lot of people, it's not as easy as stop eating. Like, you didn't get diabetes because you ate too much sugar, right? Like there was like a whole lot of chemistry that was happening. Like I was talking to somebody a couple of years ago who also had diabetes, and she said, eating oatmeal, not even oatmeal with like any sugars or anything, just like plain oatmeal, always shoots her sugar up really, really high. And it was just like, but in the sort of like lay understanding, you would be like, oh, but if you eat oatmeal, you should be fine, right? Like, but like our bodies are so specific and they react so differently to so many different things. So yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Oatmeal also makes me spike really high. And for years, that was it. Is it oatmeal or is it a donut, right? Like this sounds like the healthier option. That sounds
Right.
better. And it's relative. Everyone's so different, like you said. So you mentioned
Yeah.
that, you know, you were given this diagnosis. They told you very basic, like, lose weight, don't eat this, without even asking you what you were already doing. So after your diagnosis, did you have any changes that you had to make, like lifestyle changes?
So I did make a lot of lifestyle changes, but they were like, I would say really unhealthy lifestyle changes. I think I became super obsessed with what I was eating. And I think I was probably like on the borderline of like disordered eating at that point, because then it became like, like I got this disease because I didn't have enough self-control. So now I'm going to manage it by testing how much self-control I have, right? So so I feel like it was a lot of that. And then, like I was put on metformin, which is really, really hard on your stomach. And so I think, I think it's interesting how, like, obviously medication certainly helps me. I'm not saying, medication does not. It certainly helps me control my sugar levels. But I think how the medical community kind of attributes what is like, affecting your sugar levels is a very limited understanding, right? So they don't really talk. When I took metformin, I was just having so many GI issues that I wasn't really keeping a ton of food. Like I wasn't getting a ton of nutrition. And so I was losing weight, but then, they were like, congratulations, you've lost all this weight. And that's why your sugar levels have improved. When in reality, that was not the case, right? And then when my body adjusted to the metformin, my weight sort of like came back. And then it becomes, oh, well, you're not sort of like,
Yeah.
like maintaining, you're not doing something right, as opposed to, so I think, those are some big ways my lifestyle changed. And then, I think I just really kind of had to learn to become a medical advocate for myself. I had to, and I and I'm very careful saying this phrase because I feel like it's often sort of like, used to justify all kinds of sort of, non-medical, non-scientific things, right? But like I kind of had to learn about the disease myself. I had to learn about what does it mean for my body to react to this food or that food? And it was a lot of like experimentation that I had to kind of figure out. For example, like ice cream doesn't really spike my sugar levels that badly. And so if there's a dessert that I can indulge in, like I can indulge in ice cream. But on the other hand, if I eat, a donut or a piece of cake or, something like that, it does spike it really badly. So it was a lot of, so in terms of that kind of lifestyle changes, it was also like kind of learning about my own body. And I will say, I also like had to be really intentional about finding medical care that really kind of like made me a participatory person as opposed to being told what should happen to me. So, I have a team of doctors who really communicate with each other, including, so I also have depression and anxiety, right? And often that
Yeah.
also impacts my sugar levels. And so I found a endocrinologist who is, a practice that's really focused on type 2 diabetes, and where they talk to you about your weight only with your consent, right? So it's a very consent-based, a very whole person-based treatment center. And so they connect with my mental health professional as well to kind of like, understand the full scope of what's happening. So when they see trends going up, there's not like a, what did you do wrong?
Yeah. And I think the mental health aspect of diabetes is really not as important sometimes for medical providers, because when you're diagnosed, you get sent to a diabetes educator or a nutritionist, never a therapist or a counselor. And like that's not the default in diabetes management, when it really should be, because it's very easy to get obsessive over all these numbers that you have to like keep track of now. And so thank you for sharing that part about the eating disorder. I know that's not really talked about, but it's more common than people think, because diabetes food is plays a big role in it. Nutrition plays a big role. And so it's something that is possible for people in all body sizes. It's not just the stigma that it only happens to thin people. Like every body size can struggle with eating disorders. And thank you for sharing that.
I mean, and it was such a like central part of my own like diabetes journey, right? And I don't think anyone had ever even talked to me about that it could potentially be an issue. So it's, as I talk about my disease, I think it's important for me to sort of like, talk about that, because like awareness of that was also important for me to help maintain my sugar levels.
And so looking back now, how would you describe kind of your adventure with diabetes? Because you explained it as like this experiment that you had to figure out, how your body responds to things. So how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I told you I got my diagnosis on the heels of me finishing my through hike at the Appalachian Trail, right? And I feel like I would compare like managing diabetes to that, where like in the beginning you're like, it's just like your body's trying to get used to everything, right? And then it's really kind of like learning about your own body and what is right for you. What are the sort of like, stretch areas? What are the limits, right? What are the, because I think it's, like the disease has in some ways, like it kind of morphs, right? As time has gone on, it shows up differently. I'm getting older. I'm premenopausal. And so what worked for me, like, 5 years ago is not working for me right now. And I have to like figure that out, right? And where once I was able to like, go hiking all the time, I can't do that. I can't like push myself right now in that capacity. So I think the biggest sort of like, I would say, the adventure part of this in some ways was like when I was through hiking, I had to really pay attention to my body and really listen to my body and really know my body. And I feel like that's kind of how I have to manage my diabetes too.
So when you go for hikes now, how do you safely hike with your diabetes?
Yeah. So I will say that I just have to have a plan, right? I think, this is sort of like living with diabetes in general, right? Like you have to have a plan. So I sort of think I have to carefully think about what do I eat before I go hiking? What do I have with me while I'm hiking? And what do I have to have in the car once I'm done hiking? Because um, before and during the hike, I usually tend to be fine. But post hike, my sugar really crashes. So I need to make sure that I have sort of, that instant sugar hit that I am like taking as soon as I get to the car, even before I take off my hiking shoes. I'm fortunate that I get to do most of my hiking with my partner now. So, he knows that I have diabetes and knows sort of like, the signs of when I'm starting to, when maybe my sugar levels are getting out of balance. So, like, paying attention to the excessive sweating or the excessive thirst and, hands shaking. So, he knows how to, like, look for those signs as well. So, it's nice to, like, have somebody who can sort of like
Look out.
walk with you with that in that journey, right? But I still do a lot of solo hiking. I just, and I think it's in some ways it's sort of all the same precautions I would take as a female hiker going out alone, right? Like it's just like tell somebody where you're going.
Yeah.
Make sure that person knows that you're diabetic. Keep something in your backpack or your wallet that lets people, like, in case there's some emergency, they know that you are diabetic. I'm fortunate that I don't take insulin right now. So like I don't have to worry about how to safely carry my insulin or sort of like,
Blame the
being
heat.
able to right, yeah, so I don't have to manage that part of it. So I think it makes it like, my care looks a little different. But if at some point I do need insulin, I think, again, it's just like, changing those routines and really adapting and listening to your body. So yeah.
Yeah, I learned that diabetes grows with me, it ages with me. And so it's always getting reacquainted with it because as my
Yeah.
body changes, so does how it responds to everything else, to stress,
Yeah.
food, exercise, and diabetes is right there with it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny because when I started experiencing my like premenopausal symptoms, well, first of all, like medicine and premenopause and menopause in general too, like it's just like, a no man's land, right? Like no one really knows. There's no like official way to diagnose if you are premenopausal. It's all kind of like, well, I think
having
you
a symptom.
are, right? Like based on these symptoms, maybe, but there's no test to like really confirm that that's what's happening to you. And so like you take that, but then you add diabetes to that, and like so your body's going through so many changes, and so you're like diabetes is changing and adapting too, but there's so very little resources to help you navigate both of those things at the same time. So yeah, so I think that's all a part of that. Your body's aging, your diabetes aging too.
Yeah, and it can be hard for some people, the idea of I'm getting older, but my diabetes is also getting older and
Yeah.
to balance both of them. But
Yeah. And and things that you thought maybe you figured out aren't working anymore. I mean, for me it is not working anymore. And I've had to kind of like, really um figure out like what is the right like combination of stuff that's gonna work. I so like, I tried Ozempic. And like it did not work for me in the sense of like my sugar levels, like if you looked at like my CGM monitor, like it looked beautiful, but it's because I wasn't able to keep any food down. So I've kind of like gone through the the rotation of that class of medicine now. And with each one, the symptoms are like, different, but it's not the right thing for my body. So, but we just have to
You're trying.
keep experimenting like different drugs, right? And then meanwhile, I kind of have to like be patient with the numbers that I see and be like, maybe even not look at it as closely because I know it's going to be high, and I think this is where like having like a compassionate and understanding and sort of like a medical professional who really looks at you as like participating in the process is really helpful, because the last round of blood tests that I did, even before I went to do the blood test, the doctor was like, just so you know, like your A1Cs are going to be high and probably higher than you've ever seen. So like, don't panic about it because we're figuring this out. Which is, like that context is really helpful.
Yeah, that takes away some of the self-blame that I should have done something more, but it's
Right.
your body didn't
Yeah.
take medicine, or the medicine isn't working how we thought it would, and that's
Yeah.
not your fault.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And you've said before, and I really love this, that people can lead an adventurous life with type 2 diabetes. What advice or tips do you have for anyone who wants to do that?
Yeah. I mean, right, like I think diabetes, like I mentioned earlier, like I also suffer from depression and anxiety, right? And particularly anxiety, my therapist always sort of, describes it as the friend that you don't really want, but it's like there, and you're kind of like, okay, I guess you're coming with me today, right? And diabetes is the same, same thing, right? It's the friend that's always there that's going to come along. And I think this is also part of the misconception of diabetes, right? Like that somehow there are like whole groups of foods and things that we can't eat. Or that somehow, if something were to happen that's like diabetic related on the trail, that there will be no one there to help you, right? Like, and that's not really true. Like movement is important for managing diabetes. And if, doing some, and I just want to also caveat, you don't have to do something adventurous to manage diabetes, right? But if you happen to enjoy that and that's the movement that you enjoy, there's no reason to like limit yourself. You certainly have to sort of like, take some extra precautions. And that's, again, that like you kind of have to like listen to your body and learn about your body regardless, right? So I think, the advice that I have is just don't be afraid to like try whatever it is that you want to try. At like, I just turned 43 this year, and I am still like, discovering like new active sports that I want to explore to see, like, in January, I traveled to Montana because I'm getting married there. And because it's January in Montana, there's a lot of snow. And I was just like, well, what better place to learn how to ski than in Montana? And, like I tried it out, and I will say, like, I sort of like, my sugars started crashing in the middle of the lesson, and I could tell because I was like shedding all these layers when everybody's like putting on layers. And, I had to remember to make sure to carry some candy with me and to sort of like, bring my sugar levels back up. So it's just like, having that awareness of your body and planning for it. And there are times that I also forget to take things with me, right? Like and that just happens on a regular basis. So of course it happens when I'm out doing active, adventurous things. In that case, you just, always take a break. It's okay to take breaks. Like I'm probably, I'm not going to say that. I'm a slow hiker, right? And that's okay. But that's how I need to move in order to enjoy the activity that I'm doing, but also to be safe. Because that allows me to kind of, be aware of what my body's doing, what my body needs. So, yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is really helpful for the diabetes community to see this is what living with diabetes looks like. It looks adventurous.
Thank you for having me.